welcome back to, what are we calling it today? Substance abuse, addictions, or maybe just, the topic of today is it's an inside job. This class is really about, because we're talking about ways that people distract themselves from their lives, this class is about how you rebuild, regrow, reform, and recover yourself, the self that you were meant to be, so that you can achieve your dreams, your goals, what you want out of life. So before we start all that, we'll do our 5 deep breaths and then we'll get on with today's topic. So you guys really did better than me last time on the deep breath. So nice deep breath in. Slowly out. Hold at the bottom. And out. Remember, our goal is nice, deep, slow breaths, and just to be in the now. Be present right here, right now. In. And out. No, you don't have to do your arms. It just makes it clear what we're doing. And in. And out. And last one, in. And out. And because I'm short and I'm sitting on a couch during this, my little feet don't quite reach the floor if I'm in a normal position, so I sit cross-legged. And realize that affects how much breath I can get in and out. So when you're doing your deep breaths, practice sitting up, practice standing, practice lying down. You can do it at different times of day. And again, the point is to really activate that calm down system in your body, that relaxation part. So today, what I mean by it's an inside job or how to grow yourself up, we're going to kind of talk about some real key skills that are often missing when people have addictions going on. And again, addictions can be substance abuse, but they can also be behavioral addictions. And another hint is a lot of us right now don't have these basic skills of living because of the culture getting so fast-paced and all that kind of stuff, and instant gratification and all these kinds of things, plus whatever home you grew up in, you may not have had these. So if we can start at the beginning and say, how are things supposed to go? Where did I kind of get off course? And then what things can I do to change things up? Let me make sure. Now see, did I start? Oh, no. So I'll have to try to take that into account. I'm bad about setting my timer. But again, that's one of those things. These tapes are not going to be perfect, and that's okay, because part of our humanity, and when we get to the self-worth part of our humanity is this idea of knowing that inside we have that little piece of perfection. That's that core value self that's in there that we talked about last time. And because we're human, we will make mistakes. And it's how to love yourself knowing that you have these human foibles. That's really the core of self-worth, but we'll get to that at the end. So I'm going to have you look at a chart in a minute. And the good news is, for those of you who like to make fun of my drawing, I actually printed up some pictures off the computer. It still looks like my 4th grade, what I did on my vacation, or my COVID vacation project, but I pulled some pictures off, so their egg drawings look better than mine. So when we get to that, people who have heard this part of the class before will be like, wow, better drawings than Darla's. So when we go back to how humans develop, we are all born in a state of connection. Human beings need to belong. They need to be connected. They need to have some community. And again, that's not a nice thing to have. It's a necessary thing to have. Babies without connection die. So it's hardwired into our DNA. So we always start in the state of connection. But then we also have this drive to be individuals, to have our own, our own self, that we have our own preferences and our likes, and we like to feel like, hey, I have some ability to have an impact on my life, right? This is when the 2-year-old learns no and mine, right? Power words, because they want to be an individual. And there's always this pull, and so when we get to the chart, I've represented it by these arrows kind of pulling in the opposite direction. There's always this pull between how do I get both needs met, both deeply seated human needs. How do I get my connections need met and my autonomy needs met? And sometimes you can also think of it as teeter-totter, and it's a real balance. Now sometimes people kind of run back and forth between the extremes and think, oh, well, I'll be connected for a while and then I'll withdraw. And then I'll be rigid for a while and then I get lonely and I'll, and going back and forth between two extremes is not the same as balancing. So that's often what we talk about is that black and white thinking, right? It's either or rather than it's and. It's both things at once. And that ability to hang out in both areas at the same time is really the capacity of an adult human, right? And that's the other thing. A lot of people are out there walking around not as adult humans, but as little humans, as damaged little humans walking around in the clothes of an adult. So, you may look like an adult on the outside, but a lot of your coping mechanisms are really from a much younger time. And that's what creates a lot of times problems in relationships, which we'll talk about relationships down the road. So remember, we have this deep need for connection, we have this deep need for autonomy. And we talked a little bit about boundaries. I used the idea of a walled city with different kinds of entrances as one way of thinking about boundaries. Because the purpose of a boundary, like a membrane on a cell, or that wall of the old, medieval cities or whatever, is to keep in what needs to stay in, and to keep out what needs to stay out. And that we have some ability to let things in or out more or less depending on the circumstances and depending on whether it's safe. Now, the problem is if you grew up in a chaotic, an uncertain, a dysfunctional, an addicted, a violent home or whatever, that whole sense of safety gets just knocked on its ass. Well, it's Monday, I'm not supposed to be cussing by Monday, usually that's Thursday. But it gets knocked on its butt, okay? Is that better? That sense of safety and security gets knocked on its butt. And when that gets knocked on its butt, you tend to walk around seeing the world as if, something's always waiting to get you. It's a defensive posture. And you never really get into that relaxation state. You never get into that state where you can actually settle into being yourself. So that's what we're talking about too. So boundaries. Now, if we look at my chart over here, and these are the drawings that I'm talking about here that are better than the ones I do. If you've got too much connection and not enough autonomy, you have these scrambled egg boundaries, right? They're all mixed up. You can't tell where one person stops and another person starts. And this is that whole everyone's up in everybody else's business. You're so busy minding other people's business, but you don't mind your own. You're going to tell other people, what they need to do, but you won't take any input about what you need to do. Or vice versa. You're always solving other people's problems, and then you have problems, and you don't get it solved. On the other end, you have people who have too much autonomy, too much individuality, too much independence, and they are these eggs in their shells. They have these rigid shells. They're not letting enough in. And often people with rigid shells aren't also very good at containing their own stuff. Their idea of containing is shut everything down. Well, eventually that comes out, and then, the shell cracks, and the explosion happens. Now, again, people can bounce between these. Like, sometimes people be so rigid. They're like, I'm just not going to get close to anyone. I'm not going to be vulnerable. I'm going to shut down. I'm not going to feel these feelings. But eventually you need to. So then you crack through the shell, and then you let your eggs leak together. You become scrambled eggs for a while. Then when you get tired of scrambled eggs, you go back to this. And again, that's that distancer pursuer that we'll talk about in relationships. That's that hailstorm turtle. That's the overfunctioner, underfunctioner, all these kinds of things. So we don't want to go back and forth between these two extremes, which is often what people do in a misguided attempt to have balance. What we want to be is these fried eggs right in the middle. I really like those. They're cute little fried eggs. I happen to like my eggs either sunny side up or over easy, so those are my favorites, right? But fried eggs, you can tell how many there are. There are clearly individual eggs in that drawing, and if you look at them in a pan, they still have connection, but they have their own individuality. So we want these healthy boundaries, and the ability to set healthy boundaries is one of the key components to this inside job of recovery, one of the key components of growing yourself up. And it's not like, waiting for other people to always do it or whatever, that you set boundaries. You also set boundaries on your own behavior, right? That you say, it's not acceptable for me to do this or that, even though I might feel like it sometimes, right? That's an internal boundary. And that's also an adult skill. And that's what we try to teach kids starting around the age of 18 months or 2. We're trying to teach them, hey, some of the stuff you need to stay in. You can be as mad as you want. But like I say, there is not one single person in this jail because of their anger. And usually I get some arguments at this point. I'm here on domestic violence. I'm here on assault. I'm here for what, you know, but it's not your anger that got you there. It's what you did with that anger. Because you can feel murderous rage, but as long as it stays inside because you have a good internal boundary, they can't arrest you for it. It's when people, well, all I did was, the minute you say, all I did was, all I said was, those are actions, and actions have consequences. So once it leaves that internal boundary, then what we do with those feelings can matter. Now, today, the new parts. First, we're going to just talk about communication real briefly. And on the chart, we talk about, on the end, people who tend to be too enmeshed and are too much in the connected end of the spectrum, that's what I was trying to say, often have what we call a passive communication style. These are the people who, they won't put their needs out there directly. They won't say what they want. They'll kind of, check you out first and then try to kind of, sometimes just kind of edge you that direction, or, whatever, or they'll just give in. They'll do it your way because they don't make enough of a stance. And the message they send to people is, you matter, I don't. Because they don't put their needs out there. You matter, I don't. They're also the doormats. They're the people who get walked on. We'll talk about passive-aggressive in a minute, even though it's not on the chart. So that's that passive end. Now, on the other end, people who are too rigid. Their boundaries are too rigid. They, it's me, 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 me. They often have this aggressive style. And aggressive doesn't have to mean yelling and screaming. It can just be my way or the highway. No, that's not how it is. There's only one reality, and it's mine. So it's this rigid stance of only one right way to do things, or those kinds of things. And they send the message, I matter, you don't. I don't have to take your needs, wants, desires, etc. into account because, hey, this is looking out for number one, right? This is that whole thing, or, in the parlance of today, like, hey, you do you and I'll do me. It's that stance, right? Now, in the middle, we have what we call assertive communication. Now, assertiveness training's been around for a long time, but assertiveness just means that you have this stance of I matter and you matter, right? My needs are important. I'm going to put them out there. I'm going to own them. And I'm going to hear yours. And I'm going to let you have yours. And I'm not going to take on yours. So it's like owning your own stuff right there in that stance. Now, if the passive people are the ones who get walked on, the aggressive people are the ones who walk on others, right? And the assertive people, it's like, this is an even position. You're not better than people, but you're not worse than people. You don't go into that either arrogant stance or that victim stance, that one up, one down stance. Instead, what you do is you have this, we're on equal ground, both of us matter, how do we work this out in a way that works for both of us? Sometimes we even have that assertiveness inside of ourselves where we have to decide, hey, how do I take all of my feelings into account? And we would watch that movie, I'm blanking on the name right now, Inside Out, with all the little characters at the control board in Joy's head. It's what we talk about with being on the bus, where all those kids are on the bus, all those demanding needs, different needs and desires and preferences of yours are inside. And the assertiveness inside of you also says, hey, I can balance those out. Now, passive-aggressive is a special form of hell, right? Because sometimes when people have been passive for too long, they get resentful. They're like, I'm tired of being walked on. So they become like, I'm going to get you, sucker, right? But it's not directly. They'll sabotage. They'll manipulate. They'll do things behind your back. This is like maybe you're working in an office and suddenly that message, I don't know where that message went, but it sure disappeared. It didn't make it to the boss's desk, or there's an error in something, or you don't cover something you would normally have covered, or whatever. So it can happen at work, but it can also happen in families, right? This is the kid, the passive-aggressive thing. And passive-aggressive often happens when people feel like they can't directly ask for what they want. They can't be direct because they're in a subservient position in terms of the power structure or whatever. So this is like going to church on a Sunday morning, church, mosque, synagogue, or just to the park, or someplace, well, not the park probably because the kid would want to go there, but someplace the kid doesn't necessarily want to go, and the parent's always pushing them in the passive-aggressive way of getting back. They won't mouth off to the parent, but they're like, I'm coming, and they're walking as slowly as they can, right? Like molasses uphill in the middle of a blizzard. I mean, that's that passive-aggressive. I'll do it, but I'll do it really, in that way. So that's what most of us, don't like. And often passive people become passive aggressive because they don't claim their real voice. So you need to claim your real voice to become assertive. Now, aggressive people sometimes get passive aggressive when they're with other power players. So they're all blustery when they're with people that they see as beneath them. Maybe it's their family or their subordinates at work or whatever. But when it's someone who they see as outranking them and they don't really want to stand up for their own beliefs, they want to fit in, they'll get passive aggressive too. So that can happen from either end, although we see it probably more from the passive end. So those are our communication styles. Now, what's new today, what we're looking at today that's new, is we're going to incorporate this self-esteem component. And I'll see if I can get this. He had it balanced so nicely. My husband helped me get that all balanced, so I'm going to try to get it back there. Well, maybe I'll just hold the edge. Now, notice I still put the connection and autonomy at the part because we're looking at a balance. So what we want is a balance, not to either extreme, but in the middle. So in terms of self-worth, on the passive side, on that side that maybe someone didn't, their connection it was not real solid, and so sometimes they're real rigid, but they often go with this. This is the shame or the people pleaser end of this. So when you talk about self-esteem, and self-esteem or self-worth is an inside job. A lot of times people think, remember that California experiment? Oh, if we just tell people good things about themselves, they'll start believing it. But if they're not doing the internal work to make that happen, if we're not doing the internal work to make that happen, it won't work. Because no matter how many good things someone says about us, if we are like Teflon just deflecting it all, it's not going to make us feel better. And there's never going to be enough to fill us up. So, people pleaser, this is a person who goes into that one down position of shame. This is the person who goes into that victim role, that poor me, that small self, and resentment often builds. Okay? Now, if you're overly rigid, you're overly autonomous, you're overly reactive, you often, when under stress and you don't feel, something gets triggered that you don't feel good about yourself, you go into this reactive, shameless state. And I don't mean shameless as in, the good way of, I'm not in a shame-filled state, because that's not a healthy emotional state. But that shamelessness, like that recklessness, like, who cares, right? So, and it's really a cover-up for the actual shame you feel. But this is where you get the rage, the bullying, the arrogance. And when we talk in this class, a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between genuine pride and pridefulness? This is that arrogant pride. This is that, well, what about you? And it's that one-up, I gotta be, I'm always fighting this fight, because, if I see things from another perspective, somehow that makes me wrong. Instead of, if I see things from another perspective, that makes me human, because we all can have different perspectives, and, we all can still matter. And that's on the matter of opinion. I mean, we have talked in this class before that, you can have an opinion that drugs don't affect your brain, but that's not a fact, right? So you don't get to, I think it was Mark Twain said, one problem that some people have with misunderstanding democracy is that you think your opinion, it matters as much as my knowledge, right? So I might have an opinion on how to do brain surgery, but if I haven't trained for it, I'm not doing brain surgery, right? Because my opinion on how to do it matters way less than someone's knowledge and experience in that. So this is often that thing where it just gets real rigid, black or white. Now, in the middle for self-worth, genuine self-worth involves curiosity and truth-telling. And when you get curiosity, you also get creativity and courage. Curiosity is really the birthplace of courage and creativity. So in this one we have appropriate guilt, meaning if I do something that doesn't match my core value, who I really am at my core, if I do something that doesn't match that, well, guess what? I'm going to have this twinge of guilt. And the twinge of guilt says, hey, the imperfection in your humanity you're showing, you're not acting up to your own standards. Heal it, repair it, fix it, right? This is that restore and repair and heal stage. This is where you get to feel genuine pride. Hey, you know what? I've struggled with some hard things and I've done it. Or if you make a mistake and you genuinely, sincerely apologize, right? Because what's the best apology? It's not just the words matter too, but the best apology is changed behavior, right? So some of those things that we hear a lot. So you get that genuine pride. You also get that genuine power. Because when you can be in your self-worth. Now, self-worth, again, self-worth is not something that, it's more a rediscovering. Again, it's that recovery idea. It's that rediscovering the self-worth that is your birthright. So it's not something that you have to build up or slap on the outside. Because often when people think they're building their self-esteem, what they're doing is they're putting paint or lipstick or a new outfit on that false self-image, instead of diving deeper and going into the truth at the very center of you. So this is where, and people who've taken the Compassion Power class know that we talk about this core value idea, and we're going to do a whole section on that next time, like what's your core worth. But just know that you were born as your birthright. That the idea of genuine self-worth is, I have as much value, worth, importance, all those positives as any other person on the planet. And they have that same thing that I'm saying I have. So it's like, on terms of our humanity, and common humanity is one of those things that really helps us through some tough spots. It comes up with empathy too, like, oh, we share a common humanity. With this whole, lockdown in place, shelter in peace, whatever you're calling it, that people are having right now, our shared humanity is coming through in lots of ways. It's this idea of, hey, we all struggle with these things, so it's okay if I'm human, and it's okay if I make mistakes, and it's okay if I fall down. The truth is, though, at the very center of me, the truth is that I'm a valuable, worthwhile, lovable human being. And getting back in touch with that actually strengthens us. Sometimes people think, oh, but if I go there, I'll be weak. No, it's the shell self, it's the fake self that will really collapse under pressure. This genuine self, this is why, and I always tell you do not have to become like Gandhi, because Gandhi's last words to the person who had just fatally injured him, this was the assassination, were, I forgive you. I'm like, that guy knew where he was. He knew his core value as a human being to be able to reach in at that moment and know, on some level, hey, my body may not survive, but there's something bigger than me, and I see, the divine in everyone else, or see the goodness or whatever he saw in other people. Now, one other thing that, I'm going to work in here, I'm done with my charts for now, so, but I just wanted to make sure we got it, that this is inborn, and that it deals with, again, it's always that, there's that pull, there's always going to be that tension, that creative tension between connection and autonomy. And to be an adult, you have that connection, whether it be in boundaries, communication, or this sense of self-worth. Now, I did want to talk about something that most people get really interested in, and folks go, wow, that totally describes things, and it's called the drama triangle. And actually, someone last time said, who's the guy who did it? So I looked up, because I couldn't remember right off the top of my head. It's the Karpman drama triangle. I'd actually said it in class, I think it's Karpman, but don't quote me, so I did look it up. The problem with this drama triangle, and we'll describe it in a minute, so I'll just make little audio or little visual aids with my hands. The problem with the drama triangle is that you can enter on any of the points. They're equally distant from each other, and you can just keep spinning around on this thing, spinning around forever. And as long as you're in the drama triangle, you're stuck in dysfunction. That dance will never result in healing. So here's the positions on the triangle. There's the persecutor, there's the victim, and there's the rescuer. And like I said, it doesn't even matter which edge of the triangle you put on that. So what's a persecutor? A persecutor is the rigid person, right? The one who blames, the one who shames, the one who's right, the one who, what did someone call it the other day? I can't even remember. Strong-fingered you or something. So the persecutor is the one who finds fault, who loves to find fault in others, generally not themselves. Find fault in others, and the person that's taking all this in feels like the victim, right? That's the aggressive person with that passive person. So they're taking it in, they're victim, they're being, put upon, right? One up, one down. Well, at some point, the victim, a couple of things happen. Either the victim gets pissed and gets into that perpetrator role, that persecutor role, in which case then the persecutor shifts over to the victim role. So, oh, you think that's bad? Watch me one-up you. But what more often happens is the persecutor, the victim gets really upset, and the persecutor goes like, oh my God, I've done too much or whatever, and they're really hurting. So then suddenly they go into the rescuer role, which is still a one-up, one-down. Now I'm going to rescue you. I treated you badly, but now I'm going to be like, treating you nice afterwards. This might be the honeymoon stage if there's violence or whatever, but it's like, well, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, or I was just mad, or, all those kinds of things. Teenagers are really good at this, right? So they're not fully developed. So you've got this rescuer then who comes out to help out this victim sometimes. But victims don't like being victims forever, so they'll often move into the persecutor role, and then sometimes this one moves to victim, then this one can rescue this victim. And that's that whole cycle that goes over and over again. And I know there's a term in the jail you use. I like to call it knight in shining armor because it sounds much more positive about your motivations, but we all know it's Captain Saba, you know what we're talking about. And that is that thing where often at the beginning of the relationship you might get as what you see as a rescuer. I'm going to help this person out. But eventually they're like, well, you act like you're better than me. You act like you don't have any problems, right? So they get resentful about, being rescued, and you get a certain power out of being the rescuer, right? You also get a certain power out of being the victims. All of these positions on the thing have power that's not effective. It's a dysfunctional power structure. So that's why we don't want to be in that triangle, because you can just play those roles out over and over. The other thing is families often take roles where people tend to stay in their roles more. Like there might be one, this is where we talk about helicopter parents and drill sergeant parents, right? Those parents often play that role and the kid's stuck in the middle. So that triangulation, notice triangulation sounds a lot like a strangulation, that will strangle off healthy growth, healthy relationships, healthy interactions. So instead of being a persecutor, instead of being a rescuer, instead of being a victim, what we just want to be is a human being, a fully, capable human being with self-worth. And we know that when we know, I'm not better than you, I'm not worse than you, we're the same. We're on this equal ground. So not going one up, one down. And the hard part is sometimes people, they go one up, and then when someone calls them on it, then they go one down. Oh, I know, I'm just terrible, right? And then it's like one down, and then they have to rescue their one up, and then they go. That thing can continue forever. So, and when you think about it, the persecutor gets in that one up, one down position. They're the offender, right? And then on the other side, that rescuer is often like the offended person, or that victim's the offended person. But it's just that flipping of those things. Now, the only way out of that destructive dance is to get to that level ground of genuine self-worth and self-esteem. I happen to like the word self-worth better because it says, what am I genuinely worth at my core? And when I act in connection, when I recover my connection to that core of who I am, how do I act? So think about it. If at my core, I know that I'm valuable, worthy, lovable, important, when we say worthy of loyalty, worthy of respect, all those things, when I do that, well, how does a person like that act? Invaluable, worthy, lovable, trustworthy, etc. ways, right? So that's that integrity piece that comes out. Now, before we end up, a couple more things. Do not attach your mistakes to your sense of self-worth. So just because I made a mistake doesn't mean I am a mistake. I am still a person with worth inside. I may need to change my behaviors. It also doesn't let you off the hook for your behaviors. You're still accountable for all your behaviors. In fact, accountability is a huge part of being in touch with that core value self. Because the core value self says, hey, I am a powerful person. And when I make a mistake, I change it. When I need to grow, I grow. When I need to put a lot of effort into something, I put a lot of effort into something. When we use our mistakes to spark our curiosity and courage, we reaffirm not only our humanity, but we stay in connection with that worth. Few more little teeny notes, and I'm going to read them because I want to remember to get them in. Genuine worth, power, and feeling like enough comes from that self-worth place. Right? I have genuine power. I'm enough. You don't want to think I'm not enough, or, I'm too much, or there's never enough. It's that enough. enough. And that's, again, that's one of the real lures of addiction. Because what's the one book that I've shown you in class? The book's called Never Enough, right? It's that idea of there's always got to be something else. There's always got to be something else, instead of settling into, ooh, I'm enough. The opposite of scarcity is not abundance. People think, oh, the opposite of this is having more, because more implies there's never enough. The opposite of scarcity, oh my God, there's not enough to go around, is enough. I don't have to worry about having so much. I have to have enough. False power results in attempts to control. Not enough results in hopelessness. Self-worth can't be earned, given, or taken away. It's who you are at your core and your birthright. And I put that in big letters on mine because, again, I know I've said it in hopefully 14 different ways on here, so something spoke to you, that is me at my core. And that if you can work on ways to get back to that core, that's going to help you out. And what your culture or your family values, that is not your self-worth or how valuable you are. Because if your culture values a certain body type, a certain age, a certain amount of money, a certain car, a certain house, you're always going to be on that shaky ground. So it's not about what your culture or your family values, it's the value that's at the center of you. I think I'll save that quote for next time. So I think that's what we're going to end with today is don't get caught up into that false self, because that's the stuff that won't get you through. Really start to remind yourself, and if you have difficulty doing it, think about a brand new baby. If you can't think about yourself as a baby, because maybe you don't have pictures or whatever, if you have kids of your own, think about when you looked at that brand new baby. But we generally, most people in this world recognize, I know there's some people who don't like kids, but they still don't just go like, oh man, babies are the worst, right? You look at that baby, and people accept babies just because they're valuable, worthy, lovable, important, powerful, etc. And then they build that connection, and then the babies grow into that autonomy. And if all unfolds naturally, we don't have to have this talk on self-worth and self-esteem. But for most of us, that didn't happen. So start thinking of some ways today you can start building that up. And a big way is to acknowledge what you do well, acknowledge when you make mistakes, and then say, how can I do better at that next time? The other thing is to actively look. And this is not scanning for praise, because that's often that feeding the false self. But look for when you do things well or when other people compliment you. Try to repeat those things in your brain rather than the one thing you screw up or the one negative thing you hear. Because people, I just heard this meditation expert last night say, people could write all good comments about her thing, but if one person makes some negative comment on, oh, I didn't think that joke was funny, or your jokes were kind of cheesy, she doesn't think about all the positives. She focuses on the cheesiness. So that's that part where we have to actively not just focus on the negative. See you next time.